All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Fridays on the Farm. This series is a collaboration between Minnesota Soil Health Coalition, the University of Minnesota Extension, the Minnesota NRCS, the North Central Region of SARE, and Renville and Redwood Soil and Water Conservation Districts. The Minnesota Soil Health Coalition is a producer-driven, producer-led soil health organization offering information, support, and networking to Minnesota farmers. My name is Taylor Becker, and I am an Extension educator for agricultural water quality with the University of Minnesota. Today, we'll be in the field with Claire LeCam, Extension educator for ag production systems in Rice and Steele counties, and with Shane Bugea, Extension educator for ag production systems in LeSueur and Blue Earth counties. Today, we'll be talking with Tim Little, who farms in Rice County. Tim grew up on a generational working dairy, hog, and crop farm west of Dundas, Minnesota. After Tim and his wife Tammy were married in 1979, they bought their home and cultivated the overgrown acres into a well-ordered farmyard to suit the ever-evolving needs of their farming and trucking business. They currently run a cash crop operation, rotating corn and soybeans, and implement no-till and the incorporation of cover crops on 300 acres. Tim is currently a supervisor for the Rice County Soil and Water Conservation District. In 2012, Tim received the Rice County Conservationist of the Year Award, and in 2017, he was named a Soil Health Champion by the National Association of Conservation Districts. Tim and Tammy were also recognized as the Rice County Farm Family of the Year by the University of Minnesota in 2020. If you have any questions at all during the session, please type them into the Facebook livestream comment section, and our hosts, Claire and Shane, will be happy to discuss them with Tim. Now we're going to go out to the field and start talking with Tim Little and Claire and Shane.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. We'll let Tim tell us where we're at and a little bit about these fields here behind us and his operation.
Good morning. My name is Tim Little. I farm out here north of Faribault, about 8 miles, basically right straight north of the airport on the west side of 35W. I grew up on the east side of 35W down by Dundas on a dairy farm, and 160-acre dairy farm. And then Tammy and I bought out here in 1980. We've been out here ever since. So, did you want to do?
Yeah, if you tell us a little bit about what you've done on these fields. We have a soybean field and a corn field here behind us. If you want to say a little bit about what you've done for cover crops and what the history is on these.
Okay, I was a little mixed up on the introduction here, so I'm gonna go back to where I started, and it was mainly with erosion issues is what got me going towards the reduced tillage and then into cover crops. So back in the day, we moldboard plowed back in the dairy farm, and my first learning about soil erosion was Dad told us to lift up the plow and leave a waterway. And that was at a pretty young age. And we noticed the difference in holding the dirt just in doing that. But my dad was a cover cropper. We just didn't call him that. He was a dairy farmer, but they had diverse crops. They had the cattle, the manure, corn, alfalfa, oats, a lot of diversity. And I think over the years, our soils have degraded so slowly in a way that we haven't even noticed that they have. So from moldboard plowing in 1991, we switched to a John Deere disc tillage machine rather than the moldboard plow. And I think we did that for about 10 years. And then I bought a DMI ripper where the corn stalks were ripped in the fall. Sometimes we worked the bean ground even. And then we got rid of I quit using any tillage at all in about, I started switching over to no-till in 2005. And when I say no-till, I was no-tilling with the planter that I own now. It's a Case IH 1200 pivot. It's all Case IH equipment, nothing really special. I'll get into that a little bit later, but so we started no-tilling, and I think I might have lucked out when I talked about our soil being degraded. If you think back to the mid-2000s, we had what I would call more normal springs. We didn't have these, maybe not so many huge rain events. And so I don't know that my soil was I don't want to call it messed up, but maybe as compacted as some of it is today with the wet falls and the wet springs we've had. So I think people ask me, well, did you see any yield drag? And I didn't. And I think a lot of it was maybe just dumb luck because I started at the right time. And then I worked in, and then my soil started changing before I even knew it was changing. And then in 2013, we did have a wet spring, and I actually took prevent plant on 40 acres, and we did a tiling project. I pattern tiled that 40 acres. And you talk about soil erosion, I was the poster child that year because we got halfway into that tiling project and we got a 10-inch rain. And you want to see dirt move, it was probably, I don't know, 25, 30 ton to the acre. We had to get a scraper to come in and actually pull dirt back up the hill and straighten things out. It was just all about timing. But anyhow, we got that project done in August. And Tom Kaufman, our Rice County conservationist at the time, suggested, Tim, this would be an awesome time, because I had done a couple terraces there too, and he was out working with that. And he said, this would be an awesome time to try some cover crops. So we did. We tried a little bit of annual rye. I worked it all down, got the tile lines amended, and then we seeded annual rye, turnips, and radish. And the radish really took off better than anything because it got dry right after that. The annual rye didn't really come up, but the radish, we had a nice stand of radish, and that's what kind of turned my eye in the spring of 2014. The difference, the texture of that soil. And I actually worked that ground that spring in 2014 with a digger, but that was the last time that farm's been tilled. And then from then on, when I saw the soil starting to change and really knew what I was looking at, it just kind of evolved from there.
What were some of those changes you first saw?
Well, the soil texture that year, it was just right out of the chute with those turnips the way they had grown. And you got to be careful you can't just throw turnips out there alone because they can take off on you and get too big, and you can't seed them too early because you can plug tile lines. But I mean, there's a lot of things to learn about this as you go. But the soil structure started to change right away. And what I've noticed is the earthworm populations, and I just took some dirt from that field, and if you can see my red shirt behind through the earthworm hole, and then there's just all kinds of little pockets, and this isn't uncommon at all when you go up there with a shovel. I always take a shovel with me when I go to the field, and if you pull this dirt apart, there's actually an earthworm right there. But when you snap your dirt, that's a good way of going out with a shovel in your fields, and you take and pop the dirt apart. Some of it, if it's tilled a lot, you can't get it to come apart like that, number one. But this, you can't hear it on here, I'm sure, but it sounds like a piece of Velcro when you open it up. It just sounds like Velcro coming apart. And the earthworms have really changed the water infiltration rates are changed big time. So, and I was just, we've noticed that our organic matter is slowly starting to climb. Since 2005, I was looking back on some of my soil tests. I do 2.5 acre grids every 4 years. And since 2009, right in there, my organic matter has come up about just a little over 0.5% on average over all the fields. So that's a hard needle to move, great. But it is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and it does take quite a long time sometimes to get that organic matter up, but you could see consistently you were getting up to that point. And I think you can observe the benefits of having a full suite of cover crops for a number of years.
Right.
Well, as we're talking about some of these structural differences you were seeing with the earthworm holes and all of that, I think we'll look at our little demonstration here. So we've got some CRP soil. So this is from CRP right across the road here. Shane, if you want to show that.
Yep. So this is probably a Canada goldenrod, but you can see a number of roots. It's a really healthy CRP ground. There's no Canada thistle, which kind of shocked me. They've taken really good care of it across the street here. So it's a really nice CRP ground.
So you can see how the water is pretty clear here, not too murky. And then we've got Tim's cover cropped soil. So tell the history of this soil a little bit. Is that same field?
Yep, that's the 40 acres that I started with 2013. I skipped 2014, but then that's been no-till cover crop since 2014. I use cover crops into both corn and the beans, and I've been using an airplane for application. And there's lots of different ways of putting cover crops on, but for me, I should back up a little bit. So we farm 300 acres, and then I've got a trucking business, and I haul a lot of grain, feed ingredients, fertilizer. It's all mostly pull a hopper, but so I'm busy in the fall. And so I like to have it on, number one, just because of workload, but then I like to get it out there and get it started. This cornfield here now, we flew on the 23rd of August this year, which is earlier, but then our crop is earlier than it has been the last couple of years. And we were just checking in here. We flew on 10 pounds of oats, 60 pounds of cereal rye, pound of kale, and a pound of rape. And that's, it's, like I said, it'll be 2 weeks on Sunday, and that stuff's taken off pretty nice. The kale and the rape is already coming up, and yeah, they all are. It's coming good. So
it's coming up. Yep. So that's the history on that field there. So we have the CRP again. We have Tim's cover cropped field, and then we have a conventionally tilled field from a neighbor, and just, no cover crops and full tillage for as long as that owner has been in place there. So we're seeing, of course, that we have a little bit more material coming off of our conventionally tilled field. And again, you can see a pretty nice gradient from the CRP Tim's field to the conventionally tilled field. And now we'll do the big test here, and we're gonna dump these out and see what kind of soil structure we retain when the soils are saturated. So here's the conventionally tilled soil. Okay, stayed in some clods there. We've got Tim's cover cropped soil. Nice vertical structure also. And then our CRP soil. All right, and we've got some good structure still there. I'll poke them a little bit. Oh, I'll bring them up to the camera so you can see. All right, so here's our CRP soil, having pretty good soil structure. The clods are saturated, so we have good water infiltration there. And then our cover cropped soil, again, retaining its aggregates well, which is nice. The clods are saturated on the inside. Even some of our bigger aggregates there are still wet all the way through. And sometimes with really aggressively tilled soil, we see a very large loss of soil structure. We're not seeing that here, but let's take a peek on the inside of these clods. And you can see that they're pretty well saturated, but maybe a little drier and not quite as fully saturated as some of our other clods here, and actually very hard to break apart here.
It almost felt like concrete when I was knocking onto it.
Yeah, actually it is a little dry in there. So again, just some of the differences, and Tim, you've seen a lot of these differences pay off for you in the field with water infiltration, less erosion. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so that's probably the biggest thing that we've all noticed. I'm going to back up just a little bit. So when we started cover cropping, we went through SWCD, and I serve on the board down there. So we've been pretty active with them, and we're pretty active in trying to get cover crops and no-till started in our county. But when we started back in 2015, it was just a couple of us doing it. And so to dip our toe in the water, we were going to use the airplane, and we all had different mixes, and we all had different ways of taking it down to the airport. And simply put, it got to be kind of a cluster. So the next year, in 2016, we actually formed a cover crop group. Guys in the area that had done that first year, and a couple more that were interested in trying it. There's 7 of us in this cover crop group, and we get together. I don't know.
Tell them what you call yourselves.
Yeah, they call us, I don't know how we got that name, but they call us the Magnificent Seven. But
yep.
But it's really helped because we're trying to learn from each other. We share a lot of what we see. We send a lot of videos and pictures back and forth. If we're out in the field and we see something, we send it to the guys, and so everybody can see it and you comment on it, and we just try to learn from it. But it really helped us because then we got with a really good seed sales, Saddle Butte seed. They're in Oregon, but we've got a local dealer here, TJ Cardis, and he's just been excellent to work with. And I don't know if I'm supposed to do advertisements or not, but he's just been really good to work with. And so we went to buying seed in bulk. One of our guys, we've all got different occupations. I truck, one's a seed salesman, one's a fabricator. One does crop adjusting. One farms used to have hogs. One farm used to have cows. I mean, there's just a lot of diversity in our group. And so they bring a lot of knowledge to the table, but we've also got different tools. Like we take our seed over to the seed dealer, and he's got a lot of equipment for handling seed. So we do our own mixing, put it in. A couple of us have semis, so we'll throw it in a trailer. Now we go to the airport. They bring up a conveyor with them. So all we got to go to the airport with is a semi. And it really works. It's really simplified applying our cover crops, and we've had pretty good luck with it.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a question from Facebook about your nutrient management. What do you do for fertility?
Okay, so for P and K, I've been applying. A couple of us we're doing things a little different. What I've been doing, because I'm no-tilling, my P and K, I've been broadcasting in the fall. And I've ran that by a couple of soil scientists to see if that's a bad thing to be doing. And their answer was that if my dirt's not moving, they feel that fertilizer should be moving. So that's how I handle the P and K. Being I'm planting into cover crops, the corn into cover crops, that's the one change I've made on my planter that I talked about I'd get back to. Actually, I made 2 changes. I went with the trash, Yetter clean sweep trash wheels on my planter so I can adjust them from the cab, and that's been a real asset. And then I added the tubes for applying nitrogen. So I go 2x2 placement of nitrogen right off to the side of the row. And then I come back, I hire a neighbor, not really a neighbor, but the 360 wide drop machine, and we come back and put the rest of the nitrogen on with that. And I'm just, I put on 17 gallons of 28% and 3 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate, and I think it's a quart of zinc with the planter, and then I come back with a little more ammonium thiosulfate and the rest of the nitrogen. Total nitrogen is like just south of 150 pounds. I think it figured out to 147 pounds this year.
And that's decreased, right?
Yeah, that decreased. And I mainly probably because of placement. Years ago, we used to put anhydrous on in the fall, and that was the thing that was driving me nuts, is to see those tracks erode up and down the hills. And that's one of the reasons I switched out of that. But then taking it into spring that way, yeah, it's more of a pain. And that's the way with a lot of this covered crop. Everything you do comes with a little bit of a cost. It's a give and take. You've got to look at your own situation. Like, I know we can't quite get the stand that you would with a ground machine. I mean, airplane versus a ground machine. We've got a really good pilot, and he started with cover crops. He farms too. He started about when we did, and he's got that down to a science as far as putting it on. I don't know he's pretty accurate. But I want to stress that everything you do, we get an earlier stand with the airplane, but we don't quite get the placement maybe like we would if we do it after harvest. But so you got to look at your own situation and plan your strategy that way. And one thing we've all learned with cover crops, you got to have plan A, B, C, and D, and sometimes E and F.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be able to switch, to plan for a change.
And how many years of this alternative management when you have reduced tillage and you have cover crops before you started tweaking that nitrogen number? Was it a couple years before you started tweaking the nitrogen rate, or?
I'd say in my case, it was probably second year in.
Yep.
I started backing that down. Yeah.
And you've tried some different things with your nutrient management too. You've done a little bit of hog manure. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So we tried that. I wish I had the name of that machine now. We had a neighbor here, Kalamazoo, I want to say it is. It's the rolling disc, and they place the fertilizer or the hog manure right in the ground. So we actually went into bean stubble 2 years ago, and very low disturbance, and they leave it right in the ground when they turn around. And I thought that was going to be the ticket. I thought, because I went into that and no-tilled corn right into that. The problem we're having, and I don't know if it's anything, I don't know what causes it, but we had a hard time getting accuracy. I mean, it seemed like it fluctuated. What we were putting on fluctuated throughout the field, and I wasn't happy with it. Just, we couldn't put our finger on how much we were actually putting on. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
So I've kind of gone back to synthetic, but we're trying to cut back where we can. And then the other thing I've changed, we grid sample every 4 years, 2.5 acre grids, but I switched to doing it. Well, I still, and then we'd do a 2-year spread. We'd spread for the corn and have enough left over, we felt, for what we were doing for the beans in this corn soybean rotation. But the last 2 years now, we spread. It's another spreading cost, but I spread for the corn, and then I spread all acres. I spread for the corn and I spread for the soybeans. So then we're changing up and putting on exactly what we need for the crop we're trying to grow.
Yeah, I think that's great that you experiment, try different things out, and kind of see what sticks. And I know with your Magnificent 7 group, you do a little bit of that as well, Tim. So if you want to tell us a little bit about some of the different methods for planting you guys have tried too, because I know that's been a little bit of a trial and error situation as well.
Well, early on, so one of the members in our group farms right next to me. We've known each other all our life. And John Becker down by Dundas, maybe some of you know him. I don't think he cares if I use his name, but so we've got 240s that lay together. And so sometimes just out of dumb luck, one of us does something a little different than the other one does. Well, it's pretty hard not to see the difference on 240s when they're laying right next to each other. And that's where we first learned about not sudden death. We were just talking about it.
White mold?
White mold.
White mold.
Yeah, it slipped my mind here. White mold in soybeans. So if we're leaving that residue and then having that cereal rye in there, it covers up the ground so you don't have the rain splash. And that's been huge in we really all noticed that in soil-borne illnesses, because you don't have the rain hitting the ground. I mean, you think about it, an inch of rain on 1 acre of soil is just north of 27,000 gallons. That's 113 ton if you do the math on an acre. And I think a raindrop the size of a common housefly falls at about 20 miles an hour. So imagine the splash. And you can visually see that when you go out into the soybeans after heavy rain. Number one, when I'm walking in my fields, I've been out, honest to God, I've been out in, because I do a lot of walking when it's raining. And a neighbor here years ago told me, you want to learn about water, go out in your fields when it's raining, watch where it's running. You can learn a lot. And I've been trying to do that, and it has helped. But I can walk after a 5-inch rain and I come out of the field not having mud on my shoes, number one. So that being said, you don't have that soybean splash. And then the other thing we've noticed with the cereal rye, comparing fields back and forth, is the nitrogen give back. We noticed that one of the first years. So that cereal rye grows up. We try to get it as tall as we can before we terminate it, depending on the spring. If it stays wet, you can leave it go in soybeans. I'm talking soybeans now, not corn, but if you leave it go in soybeans, you can get away with it if it stays wet. If it's going to be dry, you want to get it terminated because it's going to dry your ground out and it'll work against you. But we've let it grow. And I think now this time of year, early August is when it starts giving back the nitrogen that it's taken up into the plant. Now it's all rotted down, decayed down. And in our group, we've noticed, the guys will agree with me, we've seen anywhere from 5 to 9 bushel advantage. And we feel it's because of the nitrogen uptake. In this cornfield in 2000, I think it was 2016, I just did a 20-acre strip here of cereal rye, and we left the rest of the field. And on my climate view, on the plant imagery, I could actually see in the early spring, the whole field is green because of the beans growing. And then it stayed the same, but except for that, well, in early spring, you could see the strip of rye because that was green. The rest of the field was brown. So you could see that. Then when the beans all grew up, it was all the same. And then when you got to August, you could see the strip of rye again. And it was because the beans were greener in that strip. So it was a real testament as to, and then I'm pretty sure that was the nitrogen give back. So, yeah.
And you kind of mentioned a few of the, perhaps some help with white mold and other types of things. Do you think that that's something that a lot of farmers who might be thinking about trying some of these cover crops, you know, you may not see that you might have those bushel increases in beans like you talked about, but you know, a lot of the other inputs that people might put in for some disease issues or soil-borne issues. Is that something that, you know, you'd want other farmers to know about with, is that really important for a decision?
Well, okay, so this is me, and I'm by no means an expert, but this is what I'm doing because of what I feel I've gained in my soil health. I've gone away from using seed treatment on my soybeans, and I don't use any fungicides. And I haul grain for a living, so I got a pretty good take on what the average yields are around here. I mean, I talk to enough guys, and I deal with it on a daily basis. And to date, I haven't lost anything on yield, and I feel like I've gained. And I think a lot of it is because of soil health. So I think you can baby step as your soil gets amended. And again, that's important. Don't try this and in the first year, oh, that didn't work. Well, maybe your soils, I mean, you look at the 2 falls we've come off of. We've worked our ground wet in the fall, and some of us have worked it wet in the spring too. So we've got some pretty tight, messed up soils, and it takes a while to get them amended. And we've noticed it in just the traffic in the field. We don't compact the soil like we used to. Everything carries better. I can normally have the sprayer out. I'm not going to say he's not going to leave any ruts in a few places, but they can spray a no-tilled field, a cover crop field, way before they can conventionally tilled. It's just a night and day difference that way. So there's things as you cycle through that you can make adjustments, I think. Yep.
Yeah, I think you've reached is there a question? Sure. So if you could talk about tillage versus cover crops and what you would start first if you were starting out and what the different importances of those 2 practices are.
Well, I think the safest to talk about starting out in cover crops, there's something magical about soybeans following cereal rye. It's the easiest thing to do without worrying about insects. Planting corn into cereal rye, you can have some trouble with army worms. There's other things to watch. But to start out, I think I would, if you didn't want to try cover crops, I would definitely try no-tilling soybeans into corn stalks. I don't think we need to be doing the tillage we're doing. The earthworms, I know a lot of guys say, well, what do you do with all the trash? This field's been cover crop, no-tilled for 4 years. on this side here, this first 20 acres especially. And we were just in there looking at the interseeding that we did on the 23rd of August, and there's hardly any trash left. I mean, I haven't done any tillage or I haven't done anything. The earthworms have just hauled it away. It's crazy. So I don't think you need to be, I think we spend way too much money on trying to figure out how to handle residue, whether it's chopping heads on combines or vertical tillage, or, I mean, there's just a lot of money spent on tillage that I truly believe if you did the math, you don't need to do it. Take Iowa State rates. I know a lot of guys say the airplane's expensive, and it is. But if you take Iowa State rates on pulling a ripper in the fall and Iowa State rates on pulling a digger in the spring, one pass, you can pretty much pay for the airplane and your cover crop. And that's got nothing, and that's not adding in all the other benefits that I've talked about with soil health and less erosion. That's coming from a board member on SWCD. I don't know that we've got a good enough measurement. I think it would all drive us nuts if we could somehow, instead of our soil leaving the farm, we could have dollar bills running down the road ditch. We'd get a handle on what we're losing. I don't think we realize how much dirt leaves. And I'm a boater. We like to go to the Mississippi, and I've taken pictures. My grandkids love to play on the sand dunes over there, but that's a pretty expensive sandbox. And they're all over there. They're along the Mississippi. And it's just, yeah, people argue you've got bank erosion, and there is, and there's all kinds of different things that fit into that equation, but we've got a lot of dirt leaving the farm also. And I somehow would like to see a better handle on that. And I think cover crops and reduced tillages, and along with, now like behind me here, we've done a couple back in the 90s. We did 2 waterways. I've done a spillway. I've got a 1/4 mile of diversion ditch over here. The water comes out of the woods in a big rain, and it used to run across the field where we diverted it down to this road ditch, and it goes down the road ditch to where it gets on a level playing field, and it doesn't take the soil with it when it enters back into the farm. And we've done terraces, both the grass back and farmable terraces on this piece. And I think that those different programs and projects all go hand in hand with the cover crop and the no-till. And this is, I want to leave it a little better than I found it. And I think that's what we're doing here with our farming practices.
And you mentioned about the 5 tons per acre being acceptable loss, but you told me that you had someone gave a visual about what that actually looks like and how many years you were farming. You want to talk a little bit about that? Yeah,
that goes back to the mid-90s. I was with Tom Kaufman. He used to be our conservationist here in Rice County, and we were out, I think we were doing a waterway that time, and we were walking across the corn stalks, and he this was in the fall of the year, and he kicked the dirt around between the corn rows there, and he goes, "Tim, you see this?" And you see those swirling marks in between the corn rows, and he goes, that's 5 tons to the acre. And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, about the thickness of a dime. And it kind of stuck with me. One of my presentations, so I farmed for I started back in 1974, but so I planted a lot of crops, over 40, and I forget what year it was. I think I had 42 dimes stacked up. And that's NRCS's acceptable soil loss still to this day, I believe. But stacking up 42 dimes is like at 2 1/4 inches. And I thought, holy cow, we can't keep doing this. Whether it's my grandkids or their grandkids, somebody's going to run out of topsoil. And so I think it's really important to take a look at that. And that's not saying anything about wind erosion either. We see a lot of wind erosion too. I know I spoke at a conservation tillage conference up in North Dakota, up at Fargo. That would have been December of 18. But I couldn't believe on the trip up there, I hadn't been up in that country for a while, and I couldn't believe the black snow. And I got up there and I asked them, I says, and this was people from the university up there, and I said, what do you think you lose in wind erosion? And they said anywhere from 5 to 7 ton on average, they thought, between the two of them. I'm like, holy cow. You know, and we've seen it here. We've seen brown dirt come up from Texas.
Yep.
I think the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
reddish yellow dirt.
Yep.
Right. And so I just don't know that that's sustainable. I think we need to change things up, and then if we can do it and have healthier soil and cut inputs, especially, I mean, it's a win-win, you know, have healthier dirt, healthier critters, hopefully healthier us, you know. So it's, I don't know. I just think it's a step in the right direction.
And we've been saying the dirt word a lot, but let's just be clear. We mean that soil out of place, right? Does everyone agree? Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
And,
Yeah.
you know, you've talked some about wind erosion and water erosion, and there is a degree of erosion that comes from tillage itself as well. So just something to factor into the equation as well, that you've eliminated that tillage erosion on your operation as well.
When you look at the new tillage, what's the two things you hear most of? They got big blades and you can go fast. They're all talking speed. So if you pick that dirt up 2 feet in the air, where's it going? Tillage erosion. I mean, when you think of tillage erosion in my brain, you're thinking loosen it off the ground and then the water's going to move the dirt. No, you're picking it up with a machine. Gravity's going to place it, what, a foot downhill? So just tillage, just the practice of tillage at all, probably the least amount would be a two-way moldboard plow, because you could plow it uphill both ways. You know? So we don't, yeah.
I don't know.
we heard the talk about tillage erosion and the soil or the conservation tillage conference last year, and that was kind of a big, you know, I wasn't, you know,
big eye opener.
That same way, where it was just, you know, you were thinking water erosion, or you're thinking no, but we've got some of these implements that are going fast, throwing a lot of soil around in the field. Yeah, it's just something to keep an eye out for. And
I spoke a little bit about it earlier. I think our soils have changed so slow that a lot of us haven't realized it. But when you drive around in the spring of the year and you see all these tan colored hilltops, I hope we realize what we're looking at. You see aerial pictures all the time and it really stands out. We're looking at subsoil. The topsoil is all gone down the hill. And that's why you see the big contrast in the colors. And what's really scary is if we keep doing the tillage that we're doing, instead of having our good soils all come down the hill, now what's happening with the tillage is the clay is coming down the hill and it's starting to cover up the topsoil. So it's expanding our degraded soils. And to me, that should be a real eye opener. I mean, go back to the dime thing. So that's 5 tons to the acre. Think about 200 bushel corn. So I know corn weighs 56 pounds to the bushel, but take the moisture out of it just for easy figure and figure 50 pounds. Well, that's 10,000 pounds, 200 bushel corn, 5 tons to the acre. So when you're raising a good crop of corn, just imagine if that's how much dirt left your field. It's kind of a wake-up call to what.
That's a good visual.
We're doing. So
right, and you see that if you're losing clay, you're losing the bank account of the soil, where it keeps a lot of that nutrients bound up. If you're losing the silt, you're losing a lot of that water holding capacity as well. So, you know, it's sad to see both of those go into the ditches.
Degrade. Yep.
And going back to cover crops, when you're trying to think about what to plant, I was just thinking about this morning, and I thought, well, think of the 2 S's. This is kind of crazy, but think of a salad bar, because we're all, biology in the soil, they're all living organisms. So they're less, just like us when we go for a salad. You know, if you can remember when you used to go to a salad bar, I mean, we haven't done that for a while. But my point is we all take something different. And the biology in the soil is the same way. They're all eating something different and living off of somebody else. The earthworms get that cycle of life started. once you get the earthworm population, their castings, something lives off of that. Their castings, something lives off of that. And then it gets way over my head with the...
It's a whole ecosystem.
It's a whole ecosystem. And mycorrhizal fungi, you get the glues. That's where you get that soil that sounds like Velcro. That's all the glues. And that's what helps hold your soil together. So number one, the S, the salad bar. Number two, solar panels. Think of your cover crops as being solar panels, because they are. That's what's pumping the carbon into the ground. And if you have diverse cover crops, they've all got it. If you think about it, they've all got a different size leaf. So they're all hanging out, catching sunlight like a solar panel in different fashion. And so they're pumping more carbon into the soil. So you gotta pick your goals first. If you're gonna go into this, you wanna figure out what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to feed cattle? Are you trying to amend your soil? Are you trying to stop erosion? And then, like I said, we all got different occupations along with farming. What fits with what you're doing, you know? There's just a lot of things that enter into it. But I can't stress enough, know what you're planting. Know when you're planting it. Is it okay to plant it when I'm planting it? A good one right off the top. They're always confused. Annual rye and cereal rye. Why they both have rye in the word, I don't know. It's like comparing a cat to a dog. There is no.
They're very
annual
different.
rye is a grass seed. It's like a fine, like you Kentucky bluegrass. It's light.
Yep. Annual ryegrass.
A cereal rye is a cereal. It's like a wheat or a triticale. And you can't interseed cereal rye into corn at V3, V4. It won't live. It's got to have sunlight. You've got to watch. That's one of the things we go by when we're flying in the fall. We like to have about 50% sunlight. That's why we flew a little earlier, our corns earlier this year. We like to have about 50% sunlight on the ground. There's one of our cover crop guys right now. He doesn't want to stop because he knows what I'm doing. He doesn't want to talk.
One of the Magnificent Seven.
Anyhow, where was I?
You're talking about the cereal rye and not wanting to plant it around V4 to V6.
Oh, yes, because it needs sunlight to get going, and obviously it needs moisture. So we were lucky enough this year. It was about a week after we flew on that we got an inch of rain. And that's another thing too, what we've run into as your soil gets healthier. We think some of you guys are going to think I'm nuts, but I really believe that we've got critters. We've got the earthworms and we've got bugs and worms eating our seed. So the longer it lays there on top of the soil, we're running into some issues. And I think that's part of our stand problem possibly. So we might have to switch and maybe go to putting it in with a drill. I mean, that's something that we're watching.
That's not crazy.
Yeah, that's
No, Dr. Liebman in Iowa State had a study where they were looking at that with weed seeds. And they were seeing that,
carabid beetles, crickets will eat weed seeds.
So it's definitely not out of the question that cover crop seed can get munched on as well.
I just love going into the cornfield with these two because this morning, and Anna was here this morning too, but we went in and they started pointing out what they were seeing. And it's just crazy, the bugs the biology that's going on out there. I walk in there and I don't even see it. And they start rattling off all the names of the different insects. It's pretty cool.
He's got some great beneficials in the corn and soybean fields.
Some native lady beetles. We found some lacewing eggs. And
harvestmen, which is like a daddy long legs, good predators of some pest insects.
Another big one on the armoring of the soil, I don't think we pay any attention to, because I've asked different guys, how hot's your soil get in the summer? And they just give you the blank stare. I've got a heat gun, and I go to Napa. You can buy one, I think, for $30 or something, but that's an awesome tool to have. You can just shoot the surface of the ground, especially you guys running irrigators. I've seen soil temps pick and rock in June, like if you get the corn up going, or late May. I've seen soil temperatures 140, 145 degrees. It's crazy. 70 degrees, 100% available for plant growth. At 100 degrees, only 15% of your moisture is available for plant growth. 130 degrees, 100% is lost to evaporation and transpiration. And at 140, your soil health is dead. I mean, can you imagine going home for lunch and she's got the thermostat, instead of being 70, she's got the house turned up to 140 degrees. You'd spin around on your heel and go right back outside. I mean, it just, and you got to think about it that way. They're living organisms just like we are. And same thing with tillage. We get all these earthworm mounds, and I didn't even know that earthworms mounted that up. They drag all those corn stalks down their hole. So you go out in these fields and you see all these mounds. Well, if you go through there with tillage, it's just like your house getting hit with a tornado. It just destroys everything that they've got working there. So if you do tillage, just know, if you're doing tillage with cover crops, I think you're taking 1 foot forward and you might be taking a foot or one step back, you know. It's a give and take. Sometimes you have to, depending on what you got going, whether you've got livestock, you're trying to work in some manure. I mean, obviously there's situations where you've got to put a blade in the ground, but just know it comes with a cost.
Just, yeah, like you said, a lot of these different practices, you kind of want to weigh the pros and cons and figure out what works for your situation. And I do just want to have you point out, Tim, I know you flew cover crops on this field. You've shared that. What did you do with this soybean field here this year? Okay,
so 2 years ago, our county put together a air machine just on a toolbar, so we can blow on cover crops, because we wanted to try interseeding into corn, and we wanted to kind of promote it in the county. And we thought if we put that together where the guys could use that, well, what we did is we have our own guys operate it. So we just get a list of who wants to do it and we run around and put it in for them. It's made it a little bit better rather than each individual trying to learn a tractor and the machine.
And trying to buy the equipment.
And trying to buy the equipment. So it's just another way of dipping your toe in the water without having to buy any equipment. So we had that, and I wanted to try, because of the mix, I used oats and, oh shoot, I haven't got that mix in front of me right now, but it was smaller seeds, clover, crimson.
Red and crimson clover.
Crimson, I think you said.
Yeah, common vetch and some kale. It was some smaller seeds. And with the airplane, I think, and the oats and triticale we had in there. Yeah, triticale, because I like planting corn into triticale. But the airplane, it floats around just because of the nature of the beast. The seed's so small. So I wanted to try it. So I used that tractor. We've got a guy that fabricates. He put that toolbar together and that whole machine together for us. And then he fabricated the wheel guard or tire guards, so it parts the beans. And we actually did 100 acres with that. That's a little hard. My nerves don't really take a tractor running down
tall beans very well.
perfectly good soybeans, but I wanted to try it without spending any money for a machine. We rented that to try that. And so we'll see how that turns out. We just did that a couple days ago, right before we caught that rain, like 2 days before. So another experiment, we'll see. I don't know. And then we got the monitor and the combine, so we'll see in the wheel tracks. That young man running that machine, I know, was a little nervous driving down somebody else's beans in a few spots, but I think it's worse. I don't think the damage is as bad as it looks. Let's put it that way. But we'll find out when we get in there with the combine.
Beans can usually bounce back pretty well.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
They're tougher than they look, especially this time of year.
Yep.
Do we have any questions? Yep.
Okay.
So how much growth do you see after you get the corn off with the aerial seeding?
That's been one of the struggles we've had. The first couple of years, it turned green between the rows. It was beautiful in 15 and 16 and 17. 18 and 19, look at the falls we've had. We just wet and cold and hardly any sun.
Some of them have been quick
Not great growing degree days.
Yeah, and so it didn't get started. And that's the way it was last fall in this bean field behind me. But it came back. I've had pretty good stands in the spring. It came back. This one I planted on May 3rd, and I wouldn't highly recommend this, but it was just the way things went. We were supposed to get 3/4 of an inch of rain, so I elected to wait on terminating. I thought, boy, if we get a little rain, that cereal rye, give it another week, it's going to really take off. Well, instead of getting 3/4 of an inch, we got 5 inches, and then it got cool the month of May. If you remember this year, it got cool and stayed wet, and so I didn't terminate this till May 31st. And at that time, I mean, I think the neighbors were scratching their head like, what in the world do you even plant out there? Because all you saw was cereal rye, you know? And if you look really, really close, you had to really look, but you could barely see the planter marks. The beans were coming in there, but we actually, when we terminated that on May 31st, we sprayed it at an angle because that operator could no way follow the rows. You couldn't see them. And I terminated with glyphosate and dicamba. They were Roundup Ready beans, obviously. And I think if I had to do it over again, it's always 20/20, but I think I would have done just glyphosate and waited and came back a couple of weeks later with the dicamba. It was too early for the dicamba, cleaned everything else up, but then we kept getting rain, and we had a late flush of water hemp, and everybody, of course, is having trouble with water hemp, myself included. And so unfortunately, I had to come back in with Warrant and Roundup, and some of the glyphosate's even getting resistant to that. And some of the water hemp is getting resistant to that too. So it's just, that's my biggest issue is water hemp. Ragweed, I don't know. I seem like the cereal rye has pretty well eliminated the ragweed. Allopathy effect, there's something there too with the cereal rye and the ragweed. That's been kind of a non-issue as of late.
You see, Tim, you just talked about rain, and now we have one little tiny rain cloud.
Yeah, right.
I don't
got
know
a few
if
drops.
Can pick it up, but it's really nice, partly cloudy. And we got one rain cloud above us.
Well, and Tim, I've seen some of your fields that you've interseeded, and you do get some biomass. You get some growth in the fall even yet, and then you get some in the spring just with the varieties you've chosen.
Right.
So,
the oats, into soybeans, we've been doing oats and triticale, and I really like that mix. The oats gets up and going. It gets about 6 inches tall. And then, of course, that self-terminates when it gets cold, but I think it helps to feed the triticale, and we actually put that in our mix this year because of that. We thought as a group, maybe that was a good idea to incorporate a few pounds of oats. So we did 10 pounds of oats and that 60 pounds of cereal rye. And our thought is that oats will get up and get going this fall, and then maybe that will help feed the cereal rye in the spring. So we wanted to try that to see if that would help. But in the corn in the spring, so I've been planting green, but I don't let it, within a day or two, I try to get it terminated because I don't want any competition in the corn. And personally, I've just used the oats and the triticale and the kale and the common vetch that I planted corn into. It's a little easier to plant. It doesn't have quite the root mass that the cereal rye has, and it's a little easier, a little more forgiving to plant corn into, I feel. And sometimes you don't get that big growth, and I think a lot of us, that's misleading, because usually when you see what you see above the ground is only a third of it. There's 2/3 more going on below ground. And again, that soybean mix that I do, I started doing that more to just keep the biology going, and I think it's really helped. Is it going down with a big taproot and breaking up the ground? No, but it's feeding the biology, it's feeding the worms, and they're doing that. So I don't think it's all about looking at what's up on top of the ground. Think about what's going on under the ground also.
That's a great point. As we're kind of getting some wind here, I'm picking up the scent of the soil a little bit, and we're getting toward the end, but I just wondered if you would share the story you shared with us the other day about the scent of soil.
Oh, so when we came out here to set up 2 days ago, I've got a little Massey Ferguson that my son and I have restored. It's Mass Ferguson 65 that I mow the ditches with. But when I started, that's 50 years ago, that's the tractor I learned on. And we had a 2-bottom Massey Ferguson plow on that I plowed with, and my brother had a 44 Massey Harris with a 3-bottom plow. So we had 5 bottoms going, and we thought we were big time farmers, you know. I think I was like 12 years old. Honest to God, Dad started us pretty young. But I've gone to these soil health meetings, and they had a smell in the soil. And I'm starting to pick that up now when I dig my own soil. It smells different. And you guys need to do that too. Smell your soil. And when I smelt that healthy soil, it just brought back memories of riding that 65 and the smells that I smelt as a kid. It's like, holy crap, that's what soil used to smell like.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know, in some of our soils, we've lost that. I know we have, especially if you walk into a wet spot where you got punky soil, and take a shovel full of that, and then go over go over to the fence line. If you don't believe me, go over to the fence line and get a shovel full of dirt and take a smell of that. And there's a distinct difference. Same thing with the leaves on your plants. If you've got good, healthy plants versus a diseased plant, roll it up till the juices start to smear in your fingers and smell. And that healthy plant smells like a salad that you'd want to eat at the salad bar. There's a difference. So,
yeah, I love that story. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I think we'll wrap up here. Thanks again for sharing all of your wisdom and experience with us today.
All right. Well, thank you. And I hope everybody stays healthy through this whole COVID thing. And hopefully we can work together and have healthier soil. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Tim, Claire, and Shane. Just a reminder that there are some resources for soil health in the comments section that you guys can go ahead and check out. And please feel free to continue to ask questions in the comments section, and we will answer those for you there. Also, just a reminder to join us again in 2 weeks when we discuss soil health concepts with Matt and Bruce Tiffany in Southwest Minnesota. Thank you again for attending Fridays on the Farm.